closed, that might help us to get a little bit quiet in here. Okay, everybody. Whew, wait, what a day. I'm reeling. I'm still like on the other panel, all the other panels. But boy, incredible. Decarceration of women and girls, strategies to get them out. So I'm Andrea James from the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. Very happy to be here. We certainly are working on strategies to free her. That's what we do. And we do that with a number of other just amazing, incredible people who, for all their other reasons and all of the same reasons, are doing this work as well. And I'd like to introduce you to some of them. Joanna Kaye is here as Director of New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. Wave your hand. Arissa Hall. Arissa is somebody that we love working with. We love working with everybody, but Director of the National Bailout Collective. Yeah. Jose Saldana, organizer for Release Aging People in Prison campaign. And again, like Kathy Boudin, I'm sorry, not Kathy, Laura Whitehorn brought into the room earlier today is Mujahid Farid, which I would also like to bring Mujahid into this space, who was, I considered, a great mentor of mine and somebody that always reminded me, Andrea, we have to figure out a way of when you guys are doing your work, how do we bring in the things that are working that we're doing over at RAP? And so I'm very happy, Jose, just because you're here anyway, but to have you here with us. Paul Sok, organizer, Youth Justice Coalition. Woo, 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 woo. Yeah. And Rita Zimmer, executive director, Housing Plus Solutions. Housing Plus Solutions, okay? And so I want to give everybody an opportunity first from their own perspective, and we're not going to do a real deep dive yet, but just to let everybody here in the space know who you are, where you're coming from your own descriptions of your work. We'll start with you.
I'm Jose Saldana. I'm also called Hamza. The director of RAP, Release Aging People in Prison. I want to mention a few things that were already covered, but I have to mention this because we really have to understand this. If we're to develop viable solutions and strategies, we have to understand how wide-ranging this problems that we are encountering are. Because if we don't understand that, we're going to come up with Band-Aid solutions that helps no one. See, RAP evolved from a crisis. And it was a crisis that was created by the white supremacist politics of mass incarceration. It didn't start in 1994. It was the government's response to the revolutionary movements that we evolved in the 60s and 70s. And it really wasn't about the paradigm of punishment. It was about the paradigm of destruction. Mujahid Farid were my heroes, Kathy Boudin and Laura Whitehorn, developed RAP. Mujahid's vision and experience propelled this to be what it is today. He was arrested in '78 for attempted murder of a New York City police officer. A crime that was redefined by the white supremacist politics. Up until that point, attempted murder of a New York City police officer was not a Class A felony. But because of revolutionary activities of the '70s, they made it a Class A felony. They made assault of a police officer a Class B felony. If you punch a pig in the face, you're going to get 15 to 25 years. That's simple. This is what it is. So they gave him 15 to life for pointing a gun at a cop. 15 to life. This is the politics that we're dealing with. And he went on to accomplish the most extraordinary things a human being can accomplish in a span of 15 years. 2 master's degrees, 4 college degrees, extraordinary therapeutic programs, and they still denying parole. And they were denying parole for 8 more times, adding 18 years to his minimum of 15 years. This is what they did. This didn't start in 1994. His crime was committed in 1978. So when he was released at his 10th board, he got together with 2 great women and a few others, and they created this campaign we call RAP, the Release Aging People in Prison Campaign. How I got involved is that at the time when they was formulating this, the first thing they did was attack the composition of the parole board. They said as long as you had law enforcement people in the parole board, no one can get a fair shake. They attacked that, and they were successful to a degree. Because when I appeared before the parole board, after 38 years of incarceration, a new commissioner let me go. So that's how I got involved with RAP. I was released 14 months ago, and right after my release, I reported to RAP for duty.
So I'm Joanna Calle, Director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. We are a statewide coalition that works on initiatives to end immigration deportation generally in the state of New Jersey. We work with allies in New York and other parts of the country as well. But part of our work really is to ensure that the lives of immigrant communities are being respected, that immigrant people can live in dignity, and that they can truly be among our communities free and not fearful, which obviously right now is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. My job has gotten infinitely harder in the past couple of years. So that's what we do, and that really is coming down to, well, if we're going to make people's lives better, then how can we ensure that they are not in indefinite detention? And I know as we have the conversation, I'll talk a little more about what that looks like. But just for context, we often see criminal justice and immigration as 2 separate things, and we tend to silo them and not really put them together. The reality is that immigration detention is, in fact, part of the private prison complex and how we make money off of people's detention and incarceration. And a number of people and the issues that we've seen of more people in immigration detention is not because immigrants suddenly are more of a threat to us, or because or as if somehow they are more dangerous to any of us. It's because people have figured out how to better benefit off of the immigrant people and have figured out how to use the system against them to then just build that onto this other system that has been around for a very long time. And obviously, then you're dealing with an issue where immigration detention used to not exist. People who were undocumented used to not be put in indefinite detention, which is what's going on right now. Additionally, something that I always share with communities is immigration detention is a civil offense, not a criminal offense, which that means that folks who are detained for immigration offenses are not given legal representation. They are not offered an attorney. So a lot of the things we think of when we think about the criminal justice system and how it's supposed to work, that doesn't exist for immigration, added to the fact that even the system that is supposed to exist is broken. So, so that's the context of the work we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Sok. I'm with the Youth Justice Coalition, based out of LA. Well, right now we're in Inglewood, but we're getting gentrified out, so we're going into South Central, just to be honest. The MTA has come and taken our land, right? Taking our community center, and they're going to destroy it and turn it into a parking lot. From a youth center, a community center, into a parking lot. That's what we're getting. So a bit of my background, just to kind of add on to hers. I sat in immigration detention. I sat in detention because I was transferred from prison. I was transferred from prison after doing about 16 years, out a little bit early because of some changes in California system law. I went in when I was 17 in 1999, came out in my mid-30s, straight into an ICE van. So watching people go home, watching people go free, walking out with the parole plans, my parole documents went to the hand of an ICE rent-a-cop. That's where my parole plans went. And I went to an ICE detention center, a private for-profit place. Sat there, went into indefinite detention, because I'm Cambodian but born in Thailand. And so before somebody can leave, before ICE sends somebody out, their custom is to get a travel document from another country. And a lot of times there are a lot of struggles between the US and other governments, so they can't always get these travel documents. I've seen that a lot with Somalians, Haitians, all kinds of people, so they get stuck in what they call indefinite detention. And when am I going home? We'll figure it out when our two governments figure it out. That's the answer for them. But fortunate for me, I walked out of that. I made it out under an order of supervision. I came home in limbo. I was out for just under 4 months. ICE came back, told me, time to go. Your plane ride is here. That's a wrap. So I went under the premise that I knew I could challenge this a little bit because of some legal knowledge I taught myself while I was incarcerated, spending my time in the system, right? Helping other people and learning to navigate. And for the simple fact that I understood that the immigration system, you're on your own. One person against the entire resources of the United States to remove you from this country. We can't forget about that. That's what that system is about. But fast forward, I got involved with ICE out of LA. I got involved with Youth Justice Coalition. They found me while I was doing that work, brought me in, and then Justice LA was formed, and now I'm a part of Justice LA. But so doing that work, fortunate enough for me, I hate to say, people say I deserve it. I don't think I deserve it. I think I earned it. I got a pardon from Governor Brown, and that stopped my deportation. It's a very tough struggle, but that's what brings me to this work. That's what brings me to this table. Pass it on. Is it working?
I think, y'all hear me? Yes, okay, cool. Hey everyone, my name is Arissa Hall. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the director of National Bailout. So National Bailout is a collective of 13 organizations. It's a national collective of Black organizers, communicators, lawyers, strategists, just magic makers, who decided to come together in 2017 after a meeting that was called by Color Change in the Movement for Black Lives. This meeting was in the South, in Atlanta, where we always meet. And it was a call of Black organizers that were doing work around bail. If anybody knows a bit about bail, bail is one of our main drivers in incarceration. When people get arrested, they usually have bail depending on how risky they are and what jurisdiction you are in. But bail outside of policing and anti-Black racism is a huge part of why we end up in cages. So we wanted to figure out how can we intervene in a system that predominantly impacts our communities. And when I say our communities, I mean Black communities. And we came up with 2 solutions. We came up with a solution to do a transformative bail curriculum to teach our folks how to not only navigate the system, but know about the system. As Black folks, we are always constantly in the system and always like trying to figure it out in our trauma. But we really wanted to take a step back and like, how do we educate our people about actually what's happening? So we committed to doing that as a collective. And then we also committed under the wisdom and vision of Mary Hooks, who is the co-director of Southerners on the Ground, to bail out Black mothers for Mother's Day. And we formed Black Mamas Bailout. And we formed National Bailout Collective. That first year, y'all can clap if y'all want. So that first year, we ended up bailing out 100 Black mothers and caregivers from cages. And when I say cages, I mean jails and immigrant detention centers. And we committed to being the collective and moving and forming a community-based movement to not end in money bail, but pretrial detention. We've been operating for about 2.5 years now, and we bailed out over 300 Black folks from cages. We've also We've also created resources and tools such as the Until Freedom Comes Bailout Toolkit, the curriculum that I mentioned, and we also are now in the process of creating a report that tells our stories and what it meant to have bailed out all these Black people from cages, what it meant to do that in across 20 jurisdictions where bail operates differently wherever you go. Even here in New York City, bail operates differently in Brooklyn than it does in Buffalo. So really wanting to like use our expertise and our experience to tell the stories as Black people when we rarely get to do that. So we collectively have come up with 3 priorities. One of our priorities is to continue to bail out Black mamas. As that's our thing, it was a Black feminist intervention. We recognize that in our conversations about the criminal legal system, it oftentimes is very masculine. And as Black feminists coming into this space, we wanted to see how we can hold our people, hold our mothers, hold our femmes, hold our GNC people, hold our trans people who are oftentimes left out of the conversation. And we also want to and are building a political community with the mamas that we bail out. And we did that with Andrea and them because we did a fellowship with 20 of the Black mamas that we bailed out. And it was a political education fellowship. And we met in Oklahoma at the Free Her Conference hosted by the National Council. So that was dope. And again, another one of our priorities is thought leadership. So really saying as Black people, we have a unique and better vision and perspective, and those that are closer to the problems are closer to molding the solutions, so inserting ourselves. And this comes out of the Black radical tradition of us freeing ourselves, and we're going to continue to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Rita Zimmer, and actually I'm representing the Women's Community Justice Association this afternoon. And I'll tell you a little bit about why am I here, my own little bit of my story. I'm in recovery, and I've been in recovery for about 40 years. And my recovery came out of being institutionalized in a facility that was a locked facility. So I'm talking about over 40 years ago. When you came into recovery, you were locked in a facility and detoxed right in that facility. And I got a sponsor early. I was very fortunate. I listened to other people's stories, and I think the stories are just so important. I think I've been moved most by Thursday night, Friday night, today, is by the stories. Mm-hmm. And that my sponsor said to me very early, she said, Rita, the distance between your addiction and your recovery is your story. And listening to other people's stories. And if we listen to other people's stories, we will find our way out of our problem. And I learned that a long time ago, and it's so powerful. And I think the way out of the shortest distance between truth and falsehood and truth is our stories. The shortest distance between injustice and justice is our stories. And the Women's Community Justice Association mission is to close the Rose M. Singer Center in New York City. For those of you who might not be in New York, it's the women's facility at Rikers Island, and that we're doing that through decarceration efforts that I will tell you about some of our decarceration efforts that some of you are already doing here and others that we're doing, and that there's a Beyond Rosie's, and that we think that any justice system in New York City only needs facility for about 100 women, and there are 500 women there today. About 400 of them there shouldn't be there. They could be let out right tonight. So I'd like to talk about that as we get going. But I think it's telling our stories, but it's also listening to other people's stories and the truth that comes out of those stories, the courage and the power and the resilience and the love and the commitment to being, my sponsor said to me also, Rita, if you put one hand in the hand of a friend and another hand in the hand of a friend, you don't have another hand to lift up a drug or a drink. And that's really what it is. It's holding our hands together and being part of one community, one effort to decarcerate, to really look at ways that there's different ways to treat people. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Great. Now that we know just a tiny bit about all the incredible work that each one of you are doing, I want to, before we jump into the conversation around strategy, decarceration strategy that each of you are taking on, I think it would be helpful, because this issue has come up. It's certainly a hot button issue in the space that we do our work in within prison abolition, and still focusing on conditions of confinement and the care of our people who are still inside. But what is the process? Each of you are attached also as individuals doing this work, but to organizations. When we talk about developing strategies for decarceration, what's the process that each of you went through to determine what's really the underlying principles that you have said to yourself and to your comrades that you are going to work from, those foundational building blocks of principles that move with strategy after strategy, right? Because strategies change, right? But what are the principles that don't change for you? Jose, we can start with you, please.
This is working.
It's working?
Yeah, I think so.
Is this working?
There you go.
Okay. Well, RAP was founded on the fundamental principle that we don't exclude anyone. No carve-outs. That's not negotiable. We don't compromise that. And they want us. The politicians would support us to a greater degree if we carve out cop killers. Our response to them is, we don't believe in the PBA's notion that a police officer's life is more valuable than anyone else's. Police officer's life is not more valuable than a doctor who saves lives, a teacher who teaches, the reverend, a mother. Their lives are not more valuable than any one of those. So we reject that. Another one we get is the sex offenders. I know that's pretty sensitive for a lot of people. But we don't do that carve out either. Because we are not going to further criminalize a person. He's already been criminalized by the state. We're not going to further criminalize him and exclude him or her. No carve-outs. When we say we want parole justice for every incarcerated man and woman in the state of New York, we have no exceptions. So that's one principle that we will not compromise on.
Thank you.
So that's actually very much related to the same way that we deal with it too. It's no carve-outs, and unfortunately, it always comes down to these negotiation games, right? Of who is truly more dangerous than who, and who really should be in our communities. We have seen, and you know, in immigration specifically, unfortunately, we have played that negotiation game and end up losing every time. The dreamers who came through no fault of their own immediately throws parents under the bus. When we say law-abiding immigrant, well then, who is law-abiding and why? I always tell folks the terminology of criminal is so objective and so discriminatory that I can't just say, well, deport the criminals and keep everyone else, because the word criminal has been used against us so many times. And so to then negotiate, once you start negotiating on those terms, you end up with nothing, because that's exactly what they want to do. They want to give us nothing. And so the principle that always goes for us is, in terms of immigration, no one deserves to be detained, period. We have to be also really intersectional in understanding that people of color generally, immigrants and not immigrants, citizens and non-citizens, are all being attacked by this issue. So we also do not throw our brothers and sisters who are citizens, who are in incarceration, under the bus either, because that has to be part of the conversation too. Because then we start saying, well, how about we just let the immigrants go and everyone else can stay in jail, as if that's still okay, because we know that's not okay. For instance, in New Jersey, we've had these conversations around bail reform. New Jersey has no cash bail. And so that means that if you can't afford it, you can still go. And that has been a huge process that a lot of advocates across the country have been fighting for. And then on the immigration side, we go to a sheriff or a county, law enforcement, and they'll say, well, we have all these beds now because we let all these people go with bail reform. What are we going to do with all these beds? And suddenly they're putting immigrants in them, right? So that's the negotiation game that we cannot allow. Like, it comes down to the principle that people should not be detained, and people's bodies should not be used for those systems. And that's sort of your North Star throughout. And in terms of immigration, is that we want people free. And then how do we get them free? Either keep them out of that system, how to avoid them being in that system in the first place, and then what do we do to dismantle that system? And as we just heard, you're fighting the federal government when it comes to immigration. And so that adds a whole different layer. But that's really what guides us all along. That good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative cannot exist. We cannot fall into it. We will not fall into it. And the amount of times we have to educate not just our own communities about it too, right? And then also fighting anti-Blackness, because that is also a big part of immigration work. And so really making sure that when we talk to our advocates, Black lives, we can't be talking about separation of families and completely ignore the fact that in the criminal justice system, we're also separating families. That narrative's the same. So, yeah. Thanks.
Just some guiding principles, right? No new cops, no new cash, no new cages. That's where we start off at. In the city of LA, just the city, not the county, the city, of its discretionary funding, the money that gets spent on schools, sidewalks, streets, parks, whatever, they spend over half on the police department. Over half. Their budget has grown, it increases. The sheriff gets roughly like $3 billion or something like that per year nowadays for LA County. LA County also has the largest local carceral network, not in California, not in the US, but in the world. We have an average daily population that hovers around 17,000 people. Roughly 2,000 of those are women, and of that 2,000, about 73 to 75% are colored. So we can't forget about that, right? But the one thing that I try not to ever forget is the history of why people are there. Can't forget that this country was built on giving cheap land grants to white Western Europeans. We can't forget that that's what brought folks over here, was freedom from persecution, et cetera. Right, and so that's what attracted people here. We can't forget about manifest destiny, this idea that white Western Europeans had colonized this part of the US, wanted to move westward, that it was their right to do so. We can't forget that they've taken this land from Mexico, a people that was already colonized. We cannot forget about that. And so those are some of the principles I work from, right? Not forgetting that systems of oppression have been here long before we were ever here. And we can't forget that not until the 14th Amendment was ratified, after Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act in the 1800s after the Civil War, that slaves and descendants of slaves have the right to become citizens of the United States. We can't forget about these things. We can't forget about Plessy v. Ferguson. We can't forget about that simple, separate but equal doctrine. We can't forget about any of that. And so in my work and at YJC, we always follow these ideas. We are mindful of history because people tend to get stuck in the moment and moving on. Something looks so great, but we forget that it's not really great if we look at the bigger picture. And so at YJC, at Justice LA, we look at that. And so in Justice LA, just for a little bit of background, is a collaboration of a number of organizations that have come together to stop the jail expansion. And we just recently got a no vote on the new women's jail, and we got a recent change in the consolidated correctional treatment facility that they call it, but it's still a fight, right? But so those are some of the principles that I work from. You know, we want to divest from the system. And we want to invest in our communities. And when I say invest, we're talking about services, places for young people to go. And we can't forget that if they build a jail, it's not for us. It's for the young people that are walking around in the streets today. Right? We're not going to see those beds. The beds are being built for them. And so those are the things we cannot forget, and for their children and for their progeny, et cetera. Right? So those are some of the principles we work from.
Word. So one of the guiding principles that we work from is like Black liberation, and also recognizing that ourselves as Black feminists as well. As I mentioned, our bailout was from a Black feminist intervention. We also have the strategy and priority of collectivity. When coming together, like I think of Ashley Woodard Henderson, who is part of the National Bailout Collective and a director of the legendary Highlander Center, like what can we do together that we can't do by ourselves? We are a collective of 13 organizations, so that's always a thought in my mind of like, what can we do together that we can't do by ourselves? And we know that the work that we've done as a collective over the past 2.5 years is things that we could not have done by ourselves. So that's a guiding principle for us. Another one, to piggyback of what everyone just said, is also not feeding into false dichotomies and separating ourselves from our people. So especially in bail reform, there's a lot of conversation about like nonviolent versus violent, felonies versus misdemeanors. And as myself as an abolitionist, and I believe that most people in our collective are really really committed to having our people out of cages. So whether, again, like whatever your charge is, it doesn't matter, right? Like, what does it mean when we say that we want our people free? And what it means is that we want all of our people free. So that is one of our guiding principles, and to not get caught up in like this low-hanging fruit, these like misdemeanors, non-violent, and to really have our eye on the prize of like what true liberation means. And what that means is also not only bailing our folks out, because we see that as a tactic, right? We know that that's not like, we bail people out and people are still going back in, right? We see that as a tactic. We see that as harm reduction, and we want to reduce the harm that is being had and received by our communities as much as possible. And in addition to that, we want to support our folks. So how can we also reduce our reliance on mass incarceration on the state? And that is how we support our people. So we have really invested in the support of the mamas that we bail out from the fellowship, as I just shared, to helping pay them with jobs, with fellowships, with internships, to also supporting them with transportation, housing, rehabilitation if that's what they want, but also constantly recognizing and respecting their autonomy. So even when we bail them out, we don't just go into nobody's jail and just bail folks out of jail. Like, we ask them, we say, do we have your consent to bail you out? So the recognition of our people's humanity, I think, is like one of our first and foremost guiding stars.
I guess probably I just try to keep it simple for me, is that probably the key part of our effort to close Rosie's and to close it by 2020, and that there's a Beyond Rosie's, is that it be led by women, and that have efforts that are led by women who have lived experience, that the leaders must be women who have had lived experience, and that decarceration efforts are really the key to our closing Rosie's and to what's beyond Rosie's, and that any new facility should be run not by the Department of Corrections, but should be run by not-for-profits, women who know what other women need. So that's probably our key principles.
So we know who we are. We have our principles in order. Let's move to talking about the strategies. And I know that over the time, the strategies can be long-term strategies, they can be short-term strategies, but tell us about the work that you're doing now, the strategic work that you're doing now, Jose.
There are roughly 49,000 men incarcerated in New York State Prison, and about 2,300 women and girls in New York State. We believe justice for all of them. Everyone who has a sentence that they appear before a parole board, that they should receive a meaningful hearing. They shouldn't receive a hearing before retired police officers, detectives, sheriffs, prosecutors. Supposedly, a jury of our peers convicted us, and that's why we were in prison. So we believe that a parole board that's close to our peers should be the one to release us. So the first thing we call for is a diversified parole board. Change the whole system of who gets appointed. No more favors. Them days got to be over with. You don't owe somebody a favor and then give them a parole board commissioner spot paying him $106,000 a year. No, we want people from the clergy, teachers, people from behavioral sciences. No more law enforcement. You may have a few of them that believe in rehabilitation, but that belief usually comes after they retire. They don't have it while they're in force. So we don't want any of them. We want a complete board that will give someone the benefit that rehabilitation is very real. That's the first thing we call for. Because right now, there are only 12 commissioners on the board. The law allows for 19. So we want a fully staffed board. The next, we got 2 legislative initiatives. And this impacts both men prison and women prisons. The first legislative initiative is, we focus on the elderly. We are the release aging people in prison. So we advocate that the first bill we call the elder bill. And we say that a person that is 55 years old, and we say 55 because in prison, under that stressful environment for years and decades, we age different. Some age a little better than others, but most of us age different. Most of us have ailments when we reach our 50s. So 55 is a good number based on our experience. And Anucci said that that's what he considers old. He's the acting commissioner. He said, well, I think a person that's 55 years, you can consider him old. So we use 55 and has already served 15 years. That's not an arbitrary number. 15 years is a long time to be in prison. And I'll tell you from my experience that it did not take me 38 years to transform my life. It didn't take other people 47 years to transform their life. So in 15 years, a person with the programs that are available, the therapeutic programs that are available, that were designed, created, and developed by incarcerated men and women, because they don't rehabilitate us. We rehabilitate ourselves. They go through these programs just like you get a 4-year degree in 4 years. You ready. You ready to be a responsible father, family man, a civic-minded member of your home community, because these programs are designed to produce this. So we advocate for this bill. The next bill we advocate for is called the Fair and Timely Parole Bill. This essentially changed the whole culture of punishment, the standard that they use, relying on the crime that was committed decades ago to determine that we still pose a risk to public safety. This bill will require them to actually be able to justify that you are a current risk to public safety based on who you are today. They can no longer use a crime that was committed decades ago to say, because you committed a horrible crime 38 years ago, you still are a public safety risk. So they have to actually measure the man you are today and make that determination. And the only ones that can do that is people that believe in transformation and rehabilitation. So those are our 3 efforts, that we're pushing for, and it applies to every incarcerated person in New York State.
So we try to basically close the funnels, if you will, into immigration detention. And then I like to say we like to close the walls in on the system and try to drain it from as much as we can from everywhere. And so one of them is, at least in New Jersey, but I think nationally, we've been talking, for instance, with our friends at Detention Watch Network at the national level to think through, how do you defund ICE or defund those facilities? Because, so one statistic we were just hearing about recently is Immigration Services has about funding for about 40,000 people to detain in the country. They currently have about 50,000 in their current custody. So that means that they are over capacity, if you will. So they're already looking for additional funding. The fight of the wall, the fight of all this other stuff is really just to find more funding for more beds, for more facilities, for more officers, for more agents, for more, they want to continue to feed that system by putting more people in the immigration detention and keeping more people detained. I like to use a statistic. I think in New Jersey it's about $170 per person per day. That is how much money a facility that is rented out to ICE is making. So it's like a hotel. That's what that is. So we try to close that in, right? End the funding so they can't expand. End the funding so they can't make more facilities, more private facilities, more even county facilities that they rent out of county agencies. So that's one thing. The other is then to get people out and see how much we can get people out and then limit the beds that are being refilled, right? So a county facility in New Jersey will have 400 beds. We know some of them are running up to 600 beds or 800 beds once bail reform hit. So now we're looking at, well, if you truly believe, because the reality is that a lot of these counties are being, the powers that be are on both sides of the party, and they like to go out there and put a statement against Trump's wall, but then at the same time are making millions of dollars off of an immigration contract in their communities. Well, you can't do that. That doesn't make sense. So end the contracts, phase out the contracts or end them immediately. But this is where the work in terms of your values and your strategies come in. We work in coalition too. And so part of it is the strength in numbers, but also the challenges in numbers that come with that. So let's say you're working with, and we have this issue, immigration detention does not give you legal representation. So those that do have immigration representation are immediately impacted. If we shut down a facility, will they be transferred to Alabama? Will they be transferred to Illinois? Will they be transferred to Tennessee? But at the same time, we don't necessarily want to fall into the system where we'd rather have a facility nearby because we don't want them transferred. Because that's the constant challenge that we're dealing with, which is shut it down but get them out, right? Because we can't just shut it down and keep them in the system of immigration detention. And how do we do that? So we're having conversations now about whether, for instance, county facilities can then put money into immigration representation, legal representation, and bail so that folks can get out of the system as we're trying to pressure the counties to lower the amount of beds that they will take in from ICE, to lower the amount of people that are willing to do that. Also increase the level of funding for universal representation for immigrants. So for instance, New York has a program where, and I think it's just Manhattan, if I could be wrong about that, but any New York resident who has been detained by immigration can get an attorney if they can't afford one. That already, it's like a public defender system for immigration that does not exist across the country. And so we need to create that so that folks can have a way out. Most cases, I think they said that if you have an if you have an attorney, you have an 80% chance of winning your case and getting out. Many of the people who are deported or lose their cases because they just didn't have representation and they couldn't get out in that way. And so we have to increase that and make sure that we actually do put funding into representation, into allowing immigrants to make their case. And then obviously, bigger than anything is shut down ICE. Shut it down, abolish it, get rid of it. And that will really end the whole system altogether. But while we fight that federal government, we have to coordinate. We're talking to partners across the country to make sure that while we're fighting to shut down and lower the beds in New Jersey or in New York, our friends in Illinois and Alabama and Tennessee and California are doing the same thing, because we have to just close that system in so that eventually we can truly just get rid of the whole system. So those are some things at the state level. We have seen legislation where we will be fighting for making sure that states do not allow these contracts to come into their states. We have to figure out a way to make sure that they can't build more facilities, because the more facilities they have, the more incentive they have to fill them. So that's a really big part of the work that we do at the state and national level.
Thank you.
In California, we have a little bit of a different dynamic that captures everything from young people's incarceration all the way to the immigration prison system. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people on the ground doing a lot of good work, and so we're able to make progress. And for California, the one difference I can say is that working at the local level, sometimes it's a little harder than working at the state level, just to be honest. LA has this forward, outward-looking, progressive idea, but internally in the conversations, they're nowhere near for a ready conversation about universal representation, about abolition, about replacing something with nothing. They're not ready for those conversations at all. And so there's a lot of challenges. Statewide, we see some similar challenges, but to kind of follow her lead just for a second, we have something in LA called the LA Justice Fund, but unfortunately the county threw a little bit of carve out. I became the public face of that, and I became very hated by the Board of Supervisors because of that fight. Unfortunately, the county didn't want to represent everybody. They said, we'll help him, but we're not gonna help you. That's it, that's all. Take it or leave it. So those are some of the debates that we have in LA County that, unfortunately, some success, but that's not a real success, more of a Pyrrhic victory. And even that's coming to a close, and we're having to fight to extend it. In terms of the contracts and stuff, we've been able, through state legislation, to end 257G contracts. We've been able to end further contracts with ICE through GEO, through CCA, et cetera. They can't just come in and build a place and contract with ICE anymore. It has to go through the community and et cetera. So there's mechanisms that we've been able to put place in California. And so there's some mechanisms that have helped. But unfortunately, we've seen people transferred out of California to Honolulu. I end up in Louisiana myself for a point of time. You know, these things happen. And so we've had some challenges, but also in some of the challenges that we work on is bringing people out or keeping people from going in. And so we've been able to build some barriers around keeping information away from the federal government as much as we can for immigration use. And so that's where our collaboration at YJC, we fit in that fold. We've done a lot of work around that. But in terms of just cutting off the neck, cutting off one of the legs of the octopus, we have this octopus thing with all these little tentacles. We say, okay, we got this, we chop it off, et cetera. We've been able to work on gang databases. You know, at a point in time, we had roughly 200,000 some odd people, now we have about 100,000. You know, in the city of LA, we have YJC versus the city of LA. We actually are the plaintiff in a lawsuit that stopped a lot of gang injunctions, right? So we're finding creative ways to really stop that mechanism that they created through like the California Step Act, et cetera, to like build this system of just suppression in our communities, right? So those are some of the things that we've done locally. Statewide, we've passed legislation to stop having young people under the age of 16 being tried as adults. We've been able to do that. Just last year, we were part of a coalition that ended the felony murder rule. So a lot of people have come home, are getting ready to come home under the felony murder rule.
Yep.
We've seen some successes of people have gone home already. They've actually come home. You know, so those are some of the things that we do to get people out, but to also stop people from going in. We've secured further Miranda rights for young people. We've secured no incarceration for young people under the age of 12. Like, you cannot detain them, period. And so there's ways that we're doing. And what we're seeing in LA County locally for young people is that we're seeing halls that are half empty, camps that are half empty. And so that's given us an opportunity to really say, hey, shut this down, close it, let's repurpose this. So one of our visions at YJC that we work on is Central Juvenile Hall. It's this old juvenile hall that people think about, that people have gone through. And we're asking for that to be tore down. And so we have conversations directly with probation, with the county, and we want to close that and open up a Women's and Girls Justice Center. It's a place for women and young girls, if they come into contact with the system, they don't need to get locked up. It's a place where they can go check in during the day. They can get unions that will be there, colleges that will be there, system players, of public systems there to help people, right, in terms of like public health, et cetera. It's not a law enforcement-based idea. And so those are the things that we push. And for the women and girls to go there, and at the end of the day, they can go home. There's no need for them to stay in lockup. So that's one of our visions that we've been pushing. But alternative, on the other side of things, locally through Justice LA, we have somewhat of a different challenge. They wanted to invest $3.5 billion in building a new jail system. That's just pre-finances. Think about finances on $3.5 billion. What are we looking at? Like $4 billion, $7 billion, right? That's crazy, that's nuts. You know how many youth centers that can build? You know how many treatment centers we can have in our communities? So we've been hitting them real hard in the county about that. hitting them real, real hard. And that's how we've made it forward to where we are today. But it's been a lot of people coming forward to do this work, not people that come from hierarchies and et cetera. We have people that are directly impacted doing this work. Mm-hmm. We're building the leadership of men, women, young people that have gone through the system, that have come out, that have survived. They're like, we got to get rid of this. This is not cool. And so for us, a lot of that strategy has been us sitting down and meeting and developing relationships. And all of us have to tap our relationships. I have good relationships with a certain supervisors, staffers. Other organizations have good relationships with supervisors, staffers, and we all come to the table and we figure out who can we talk to get that narrative moving. See what their obstacles are, and what they do is they present us with obstacles. And then we're like, hold on, that's not an obstacle. They were like, oh, but this consent decree says that. And I'm like, but this consent decree doesn't tell you to go build another jail. It doesn't direct you to do that. It just says improve these conditions. We can do that by decentralizing this network that you have, by bringing people out and having centers all throughout LA County that people can go to get services. And so these are a lot of the different strategies that we come through. And every time they put up a barrier, we've cornered them somehow, some way, by using their own information, things they've given us, right? And we've developed relationships with their staffers where their staffers are like, okay, cool, now we're coming to you for answers. We've worked that rapport so much that they come to us and seeing us as the experts. And we were able to push them to create something called the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group. And some of our own coalition partners are on that work group. Right, so that's what we've had to do in LA County to make things work, right? To really stop things locally. Unfortunately, you know, we have to work also with the sheriff that's there, a sheriff that is a sheriff, regardless however you want to call it. You know, we have Jackie Lacey there. Just to give you a sense of a statistic, in LA County since 2000, law enforcement has killed over 800 people. I think 851 or something already to date. 0 prosecutions. That's who we have as a district attorney. Not a single cop has ever been more than this. So if you or me, somebody that's colored, walk down the street, spit on the curb, up on the wall, spread your feet, what you got in your pockets, right? That's what we get for something minor. And if we do something they consider a really tough harm, they throw the book at us, right? And so we have to be mindful of those things, and those are the things that we bring to LA County to explain, hey, these are the things that are going on. And also in LA County, what we've come to realize is that in conversations with the sheriff directly, we've been able to meet with them. We've been able to get information from them. What's your ideas about the jail system? How many people do you have in there? Oh, we have X amount of people. How many of those people are there for this? So we've been collecting data, we've been collecting information. And so we've been pushing the county to say, most of these people don't even need to be there. About 3,000 people in there are there because they were cited for having some type of mental health issue. Why don't you put them in a mental health treatment center? Right? And so we've been starting to dissect the population, seeing who's there. And we've been able to really hit that gauntlet to say, look, you're moving forward with a plan. You're awarding contracts based on some consultants that were here for some other interests, private interests of decarceration, of wanting to put ankle braces on people so they can charge money, to have that profit, right? Because we live in a capitalist society, unfortunately. Right. But so some of that work we've had to really do to just reveal a lot of things to them so that they can see it and to really figure out how many beds do you really need in this county. It's not what you think you need. Right. They came up with this arbitrary number, said we're gonna build this 3,800 bed monolith right here. We're like, is that really needed? And so now they're shaking, right? Because we've been able to really come at them in every angle. So that's some of the work we've done. It's really not just us two as well. I also want to say that it's the community that's come. When we've had hearings, we've been able to mobilize. We send out alerts. We meet every month with the community. Community comes out, pack the room. We're talking about it. We're having conversations. We're engaging people. The one thing I just want to close out on this tip is that we as a community have power. Yes. Right? And the one thing I want to define as power is that I've sat in a lot of rooms talking with law students that come from other countries and talking with law students in the US. There's this big dividing line I see every time I'm in that space. Folks from the US always say it's about being able to survive, white picket fence, having a car. It's very individualistic because that's the model of social control that they've placed in the US. People from other countries always say it's about us getting together and being revolutionaries and overthrowing our regimes. And so the power is in us, right? It's the ability of us as a community to get together, to overthrow or to shift something that represses us to something that no longer does. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. So we have 3 strategic priorities as National Bailout. One is to continue to do annual or biannual bailouts. So we have upcoming Black Mamas Bailout happening this Mother's Day. And the strategy behind continuing to do the bailouts, as I previously mentioned, it's a tactic. It's a way to get our people out. In addition to that, it's a way for us to identify leaders. We recognize that those that have been directly impacted are our strongest leaders and are the experts of the situation. And it's also a way for us to build our collective power. When folks get out, folks are like upset, enraged. When we are in community with one another, we have the tactics, the strategies, the knowledge and information to move accordingly. And it's a way for us to really understand how these different systems work. In doing these bailouts, we've learned so much information, like a whole bunch of information, and it's a way that we organize and utilize like that information to destroy these systems, to leverage lawsuits and other different tactics that our local partners and organizations are doing. For example, in Harris County, which is Houston, we learned during our first bailout that if you pay bail for someone, that you are no longer allowed a public defender because you are not considered indigent. Right? That's not on the books. That's not something that we would have learned unless we would actually bail those folks out. In Dothan, Alabama, and this is a lot predominantly in the South that these things are happening. In Dothan, Alabama, we learned that this wasn't really bail that we were paying, that there was actually fines and fees, which was illegal. Right? So we wouldn't have known that unless we would have paid bail for these folks. And we really are taking this information, taking this knowledge to leverage in local fights and in national fights. Our second priority is political development and building a national community with the mamas that we bail out. Again, we aren't service providers. We are community members. We are folks in this collective fight for liberation. And we don't see the mamas that we bail out, the people that we bail out, as folks that we provided a service with. We see them as co-conspirators and collaborators in our freedom. So part of that has been the fellowship that I briefly spoke about, but this fellowship came out of the vision of Janae Taylor, who is part of the Gilded Papoose Collective out in DC. Janae did this wonderful thing because she's a theater geek. She was like, yo, how do we actually pay these mamas and like get them in community, and like what do we do after like they come home? And she came up with this idea like, yo, we should do a theater fellowship. And we're like, theater? Girl, what? But it became a real theater fellowship where she engaged the mamas and had them reading different plays, and they ended their fellowship at the Kennedy Center in DC. And it was such a powerful tool, and it was also a way that she just engaged with the idea of like, how do we highlight the absurdities of prison? And with that, we launched our Free Black Mamas Fellowship, which was the 8-week political education fellowship where mamas got to learn about everything from the prison industrial complex to the specific criminalization that they're experiencing in their location because of them being a Black queer mother. And then they got to not only do that in the different organizations that they are based in, but they got to then meet one another, right? So mamas in Philly were meeting mamas in Vegas, were meeting mamas in New Orleans, and meeting mamas in California, right? And they recognized like, oh, like I know that I got like bailed out, but I didn't know that I was part of this larger thing. And it also broke the chains of isolation that incarceration gives and brings, right? So mamas were like, yo, I'm in community. Like, I see you in me, and we're doing this together. And they got to be together thanks to Andrea and the folks at the National Council when we went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, when they got to be in community with other mothers, with other femme folks, with other women and girls, and say like, yo, we could build power regardless of my circumstances. Like, we could make it, and we gonna make it. And it was a beautiful thing to witness and be a part of, because we also got to see how folks like shift as well. Like folks that started our fellowship by saying like, oh, I'm in jail or I was in jail because of my addiction. And which we had to be like, but white folks don't go to jail for addiction. Right? Like what does that mean? And really pushing folks. And now the folks that have said to me personally, like, I was in jail because of my addiction, and now like, no, I was in jail because of like my addiction and my body was criminalized. Right? So it's just a powerful thing that we really are invested and continue to do. And part of that is also building a supportive services infrastructure. We are in the business of experimentation and how do we respond to our people's needs. And that looks so many different ways. Dr. Nubian's son out in New Orleans has just launched an organization, which is a kindred sister of song, called the Center for Resilient Individuals, Families, and Communities, where the mamas that we build out in the South are currently, as we speak, doing internships at Black-led organizations to learn and build power. So we are really invested in that work and going to continue to do that work. And the last but not least is our love leadership, and I'm looking at Gina because Gina is part of SC Justice, is part of National Bailout, and we had this conversation about like love leadership, aka thought leadership. And it's just like, how do we continue to insert ourselves as the experts that we are as Black people doing this work? How can we say that we have a unique and better vision, and how can we lead and shift the conversations, because these conversations have been being led by us and shifted by us. How do we say not only in money bail, but in pretrial detention and abolition, and like this is connected to slavery and all the things. And we have been saying that, and we are continuing to say that, and we said that through our vision when Mary Hooks shared this to bail out Black mothers and said that this is in the tradition of our ancestors, and we have been continue to do it when we build resources for our people and say like we building out all Black people, we building out Black mamas and caregivers, and this is a specific intervention, and we aren't going to separate our people based on charges or any other qualifiers. So we're continuing to do that. We're doing that with this bail report that I mentioned as well, which should be dropping in late summer, but where we're going to be talking about our experiences. We're going to be giving policy recommendations because we do policy too. We're going to be giving organizing recommendations as well. And we also are in another phase of experimentation, which is a needs assessment working group. So if you know a little bit about bail, we have these risk assessments being pulled out on our people. Instead of money bail, they're like, oh, how can we determine if you're risky, right? And being risky could be based on anything. We know that these risk assessments are algorithms. They're very much racist. They try to present them as like neutral. We know data is not neutral. So we want to make sure that we using our data, we collecting our data, and we using it for our cause, which is our liberation. So we are in a needs assessment working group to say like, no, our people aren't risky, but like, what do we need? Well, how can we assess people's needs, right? And how can we recognize that it's not the risk, but it's the need that is necessary, that's putting our people in cages, and because the state and these systems have neglected us. So that's our work.
Okay. I'm going to try to look over to my left once, but I realize every time I start talking, I'm looking this way, so hi over there. I'm going to describe a project of 49 units of housing for women in New York City. And it started because when we looked at the number of women at Rikers, we were about 500 women, we realized actually about 80% of them are being detained. They've not been convicted. And I think it's really important to talk about that. We're talking about people who are in jail who are not convicted. Most of them are there because they're detained. Most of them are detained for months and months unnecessarily because they can't make bail, because they're homeless, because they need other services, they need mental health services, they need addiction. And so our idea, this group of women, we realized this, and the other thing we realized, New York City, it costs $240,000 a year to keep somebody in Rikers Island. That's $740 a day. Now, what could we do with that money?
Right.
I bet we sat here for another hour, we'd probably come up with 1,000 ideas of how to better use that money. And so that's what we said. There are better ways to use that money. A group of us went to the city, we went to the mayor's office of criminal justice, and they were listening. We told them stories. We told them the real statistics, that many of these women are mothers, that they're caregivers. We told these women have mental health problems. These are women who have addictions. They need to be in treatment. They need to be in decent housing. These are women who've been in the shelters. The shelter has become a pipeline to the prison system. And so we were able, over to about a year over time, we were able to convince the city that it give us a chance to use some of that money. We don't want $240,000 per person, but we'd like a little bit of money, and we can show you that if we could develop housing, and housing that has services and helps women with during this transition, they can go back and forth to their court dates. They're being detained. They're not convicted. They'll make their court dates on time. They'll get the services they need. They'll get reunited with their children and families. That is a better way for women to be served. The city, in their wisdom, and I really give them credit, they actually gave us a grant. By 137 women. 137 women have moved out of Rikers into our housing, and while they're there, they get the services they need.